The word gospel comes from Old English, which just means good news. But even the phrase good news among churchy audiences tends to communicate religion more than the radical implications that I've seen in the life and teachings of Jesus. Many people know that I worked as a journalist, both as a reporter and as an editor, before I quit writing news in an effort to make some news myself, as I put it at the time. I honestly saw in the life and teachings of Jesus good news from a newspaper perspective, and I think that professing Christians have too often overlooked that potential. To me, it was almost like offering a gift to the news media of the world to start giving them unique and very interesting stories that could not be found anywhere else. The word news, to the people who specialize in broadcasting the stuff, comes more from the word novel than it comes from the word new. New things are happening all the time, and most of it is boring with a capital B. But recent events that are novel make up the sort of things that the public wants to hear about. There is a saying among news reporters that defines news. If a dog bites a man, that is not news. But if a man bites a dog, that is. See, people want to hear about the exceptional, unusual, radical, even offensive stuff more than they want to hear about the mundane and commonplace. Unfortunately, so much that passes for Christianity today is more on the boring end of the spectrum than the novel end. And a quest for respectability is, in my opinion, behind it all. It was not like that in Jesus' day. Jesus never had to hire halls and send out ads to get people to attend his meetings. His life and teachings drew the crowd so much that he was often on the run away from them. But he was hated too, and that was inescapably linked to all the good that he did. He embarrassed the lukewarm with his radical behavior. That includes things like deliberately healing people on the Sabbath in order to highlight the stupidity of blindly fixating on one day of the week when we could be doing good all 7 days if we would just stop working for money 6 days a week. So how did Jesus attract the crowds? The most obvious answer is that he did miracles, healings in particular. So the most obvious thing that some churches have done to create the same effect is to pretend to do miracles today. Lying signs and wonders, as the Bible puts it. Some add other embellishments, whether it's people barking like dogs or showmen waving coats at people and making them fall down. It's all part of the circus that attempts to convince the world that something newsworthy is happening inside all those boring megachurches. It worked for a while, but little by little, the whole world has come to see through the lies and pick up that far more miraculous and newsworthy healings are happening in hospitals these days. Nevertheless, it makes sense for us as Christians to recognize that there is a place and a genuine need for professing Christians to do something that is not being done by anyone else, as a way of drawing attention to our message. But it may also start with us asking ourselves what the message is. Jesus called it the good news of the kingdom of heaven. But that has been changed by the churches to good news about going to a place called heaven after you die. Never mind that religions all over the world make similar claims, whether it's a resurrection inside a pyramid, travel to the happy hunting ground of indigenous Americans, or some reincarnated step closer to nirvana in Eastern religions. It's all pretty much the same. Follow these 3 steps and you can live on after death. Hardly something to stop the presses for in order to produce an extra edition of a newspaper. I see the answer to how Jesus did it in the first verse of the 8th chapter of Luke, where Luke reports that Jesus traveled in company with a bunch of other people, both male and female, from town to town, showing people the kingdom of heaven. In one way or another, the world needs to see something newsworthy in our Christian walk. Yet all the newsworthy stuff is exactly what has been blotted out of modern-day churchianity. See, the early Christians lived together 24/7. They sold everything they owned. They stopped working for mammon and started working for God. This change in lifestyle is sometimes referred to in Scripture as taking up your cross and following Jesus. In other words, the first Christians became a literal army of people who had taken up Jesus' yoke upon themselves and started working for Jesus. The Gospels talk about his followers going from village to village, actually showing people a new lifestyle that spontaneously grows out of a bunch of people who no longer work for money. When we read the four Gospels, we see that following Jesus stops being some theoretical claim inside our heads, and it turns into the things we do every day. We have a new job and a new employer, and he wants us to get the world to see the difference. After the first Christians took those steps, history tells us that the secular world was amazed and said things like, "Behold how they love one another." Others said, "They have turned the world upside down." Did they do it through theological statements? Did they do it through morning teas and exercise classes at the local synagogue? Did they do it by becoming famous celebrities and getting rich? No. They did it by making themselves available in service to the rest of the world for free. Freely you have received, so freely give. Jesus said this as he sent them out 2 by 2 into the cities where he would come later to share more deeply with the residents. Sometimes a Christian may just quietly serve, and at the end of a single life, a book may be written, a story told, or even a movie will be produced to highlight that one heroic life. But that should not rule out the immediate impact of a whole group of people living such a life right now. It's taken us, Jesus Christians, nearly 50 years to gather a small handful of people who are prepared to be Sister Teresa's or St. Francis's of Assisi. What we need to do now is just to very openly practice a type of love that the world cannot imitate. We have stopped working for money so that we can work freely for God and for others, choosing what we want to do and looking for what can be most helpful in the world around us. It may be some kind of healing service, but it can take almost any other form as well. The main thing is that we do it in love and that we use it to communicate the message, which is that the whole world could live like this if we would all look for ways to be useful instead of looking for ways to make money. Can you see why I say that real Christianity will be newsworthy if anyone starts putting it into practice? In the early days of the Jesus Christians, we experimented with a lot of different projects where we would get people thinking about the whole concept of living by faith and working for love. We got heaps of news coverage, even though critics argued that we were seeking publicity for selfish reasons. Well, I became intimidated by all those criticisms and encouraged the Jesus Christians to lower our profile and just labor on faithfully and quietly. But in doing that, I threw out half of our message. We could still preach it in theory, but we were missing all the help that the mass media could give us in telling the world that we are unique, even if we are widely hated. See, even the persecution that we receive is newsworthy. It has reached the level where there is virtually nothing that we have not been accused of. It's actually becoming embarrassing to some sections of the media to even mention a group which has so obviously been lied about for some vague reason over all these years. The media thrives on scandal, but almost all of the stones that they have thrown at us have either missed the target or bounced off. Nevertheless, some of the message is getting through. A lot of people now know that there is this tiny little fellowship, whether it is Christian or not, that has literally spread around the world. No one in the fellowship works for money, yet they have survived and even thrived for several decades. They do strange things like writing a radically different dictionary for use in schools, walking across a desert without taking food or water, donating one of their kidneys to strangers, painting huge murals on walls without permission, supergluing paper money on sidewalks with messages on them, popping up in shopping malls dressed as Old Testament prophets with scrolls full of Bible verses while remaining speechless themselves, painting the longest piece of graffiti in the world in one night, working for families and businesses for free, and more. Every single one of these activities aimed at communicating some part of the overall message, which is a return to God and Jesus and to what God and Jesus have told their followers to do. The good news is that following God and Jesus leads people into a radically different lifestyle, which Jesus called the kingdom of heaven, where values are upside down compared to the values of the rest of the world. Instead of trying to get more money, we try to live on less, and the results are spiritually empowering. So let's stop worrying about people calling us publicity seekers and start seeking publicity for genuine Christian reasons, which is to get the world to hear at least some of the message that Jesus preached. What Jesus taught is rightly called good news by at least 4 different New Testament writers, but it will stay locked inside that dust-covered book until people start putting it into practice in their everyday life and then start sharing that lifestyle with the rest of the world in radically newsworthy ways. I hope we can keep this vision of the gospel as we move forward in search of other ways to get the world to take notice of what Jesus taught about breaking free from wage slavery into the liberation of faith and love. God bless you, and thank you for listening.